The mansion loomed before them, a dark silhouette against a cloudy night sky. Its once grand stone facade was weathered and cracked, ivy creeping up its walls like the fingers of something long dead. The iron gates creaked ominously as Arthur pushed them open, glancing warily at the overgrown garden filled with dead plants and rusted garden tools. "This place screams haunted death trap," Arthur muttered, adjusting the strap of the heavy duffel bag slung over his shoulder. The bag bulged with an arsenal of ghost hunting tools, EMF detectors, thermal cameras, and salt packets stuffed into every spare pocket. "It screams opportunity," Jeff replied cheerfully, marching through the gates with his usual dramatic flair. His cape, yes, he was wearing a cape again, flared behind him, the edges glittering faintly in the moonlight. In one hand, he carried a kazoo. In the other, a bright blue cooler with the words "Snack Emergency" scrawled on the side in permanent marker. Arthur stared at the cooler. "What's in there?" "Provisions," Jeff said solemnly. "Provisions for what?" "For the spirits, Arthur. Snacks are a universal language." Jeff patted the cooler like it was a sacred artifact. Arthur sighed, shaking his head. "Why do I even bring you to these jobs?" "Because I'm indispensable," Jeff replied without hesitation. "Now, shall we meet our ghostly hosts?" The mansion's front door groaned as Arthur pushed it open, the sound echoing down the long, dark hallway beyond. Dust motes danced in the weak beam of his flashlight, and the air smelled faintly of mildew and regret. Jeff followed close behind, humming a jaunty kazoo tune that immediately set Arthur's teeth on edge. "Could you not do that?" Arthur hissed. "It's called setting the mood," Jeff said, grinning. "It's called giving me a migraine," Arthur snapped. They stepped into the grand foyer, where a massive chandelier hung precariously above a cracked marble floor. Arthur shuddered as a cold breeze swept past them, rattling the remnants of tattered curtains. He immediately began unpacking his tools, placing an EMF detector on a nearby table and flipping it on. Jeff, meanwhile, opened his cooler and pulled out a bag of chips. "Spirits of the mansion," he called, his voice echoing through the empty halls. "We come in peace. Also, I brought barbecue-flavored offerings." Arthur froze mid-setup, glaring at Jeff. "Could you please take this seriously?" "I am serious," Jeff said, crunching loudly on a chip. "Ghosts love snacks." "You have zero evidence to back that up." Jeff waved his kazoo at the EMF detector, which immediately began to spike. "And yet, the ghosts are responding." Arthur's eyes widened as the device beeped furiously. He glanced around the room, his flashlight catching a flicker of movement in the corner. "Okay, that's creepy." Jeff grinned, raising his kazoo like a herald's trumpet. "Spirits, reveal yourselves, and I shall honor you with the gift of music." He played a shaky rendition of "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." As if on cue, the temperature dropped sharply, and the lights began to flicker. A soft, ghostly wail echoed from somewhere deep within the mansion. Arthur grabbed a thermal camera, frantically scanning the room. "Jeff, stop antagonizing them." "I'm not antagonizing," Jeff said, affronted. "I'm communicating. You're kazoo-gating." Before Arthur could argue further, a loud thud reverberated through the mansion. Both men turned toward the grand staircase, where a pale, glowing slime had begun oozing down the banister like ectoplasmic molasses. Jeff's eyes lit up. "Arthur, look! Ghost slime!" Arthur stepped back, his face pale. "Don't touch it. For the love of—" Jeff ignored him, crouching down to poke the slime with a stick he'd found on the floor. It's viscous but pliable. This would make excellent party slime for children's events." The ghostly wail turned into an enraged howl, and the chandelier above them began to sway dangerously. Arthur grabbed Jeff's arm. "What did you do?" "Nothing," Jeff protested. "I just made an innocent observation." The walls shuddered, and a painting fell to the floor with a deafening crash. Doors slammed in rapid succession, and the air was filled with an eerie voice that growled, "Leave or fix it!" Arthur stared at Jeff, his expression a mix of disbelief and fury. "What does that even mean?" Jeff shrugged, still holding the kazoo. "Maybe they want us to fix the slime distribution system?" Arthur groaned, dragging a hand down his face. "We're going to die here." "Don't be so dramatic," Jeff said, waving his kazoo dismissively. "We just need to figure out what they want. How hard can it be?" As if in response, the chandelier plummeted from the ceiling, smashing into the marble floor just inches from where they stood. Arthur's voice rose to a near scream. Very hard. The two of them stood frozen as the ghostly voice boomed again, this time clearer. Leave, or fix it. Jeff smiled brightly, his confidence unwavering. Well, Arthur, looks like we've got ourselves a mystery to solve. Arthur groaned loudly as Jeff began playing another kazoo tune, oblivious to the glowing figures beginning to materialize behind him. The chandelier's shattered remains glittered across the cracked marble floor, a stark reminder that the mansion's ghostly residents weren't in the mood for subtlety. Arthur stood frozen, gripping his thermal camera like a lifeline, while Jeff casually leaned against the banister, examining the ectoplasm still dripping from the railing. Leave, or fix it! The voice boomed again, shaking the very walls of the mansion. Arthur pointed his flashlight toward the grand staircase, catching the faint shimmer of translucent figures beginning to take shape. Jeff, do you see that? They're materializing. Jeff nodded thoughtfully. Good. I was starting to think they weren't listening. He raised his kazoo and blew a long, off-key note. The spectral forms twitched violently, their ghostly glow intensifying. Stop antagonizing them, Arthur hissed, his voice trembling. Jeff raised an eyebrow. I'm not antagonizing. I'm communicating. It's kazoo diplomacy. The ghost nearest to them, a tall, gaunt figure with a faintly glowing head, let out a guttural moan, its translucent arm gesturing toward a side door. Arthur took a step back, his voice tight with panic. What's it pointing at? Jeff straightened, clutching his kazoo like a scepter. Only one way to find out. The door creaked open into what had once been a parlor, now dimly lit by flickering wall sconces. Dust-covered furniture sat haphazardly across the room, and in the center was an ancient karaoke machine surrounded by cobwebbed microphones. Jeff's eyes widened with delight. Arthur, behold! The holy grail of musical contraptions. Arthur squinted at the machine, then looked back at the ghostly figure that had followed them into the room. The ghost gestured emphatically at the karaoke setup, its movements increasingly agitated. You've got to be kidding me, Arthur muttered. The ghosts are upset. About this? Of course, Jeff said, stepping forward. It's so obvious. They're karaoke enthusiasts whose greatest joy has been silenced. That's not obvious at all, Arthur shot back. Jeff ignored him, crouching in front of the machine and examining it. The device was a relic from decades past. Its buttons faded and the screen cracked. Jeff tapped it experimentally, and the ghost let out a frustrated moan. It's broken, Jeff declared, standing dramatically. A tragedy for all spirits who long to belt out their favorite tunes. Arthur threw up his hands. Great. Let's tell them to call a ghost repairman and get out of here. Jeff waved a hand dismissively. Nonsense. We're here to help. I shall fix it. Arthur's jaw dropped. You? Fix a karaoke machine? Jeff grinned. How hard can it be? Jeff's first attempt to fix the machine involved banging on it with the butt of his kazoo. You have to assert dominance over faulty technology, he explained. The machine responded by ejecting a moldy cassette tape, and the ghostly moans grew louder. Okay, plan B, Jeff said, rummaging through his cape pockets. He pulled out a roll of duct tape and began wrapping it around random parts of the machine. Arthur grabbed his arm. Stop! You're making it worse. The ghost hovered closer, its ethereal face inches from Jeff's. Fix it. It groaned, its voice trembling with barely contained rage. Relax, Jeff said, patting the ghost on its non-corporeal shoulder. I've got this under control. Arthur groaned, stepping in. Let me handle this. He crouched down, carefully opening the back of the machine and inspecting the tangled wires. Looks like the power connection is shot. Jeff peered over his shoulder. Ectoplasm might work as a conductor. Ectoplasm does not. Arthur stopped as Jeff smeared a glob of the glowing slime across the wires. Sparks flew, and the karaoke machine roared to life, emitting a screeching static that made Arthur's hair stand on end. The ghosts began to stir, their translucent forms vibrating with excitement. One of them floated toward the machine, grabbing a microphone and letting out a long, mournful wail that somehow harmonized with the static. Jeff clapped his hands. See? They're warming up. One by one, the ghosts took turns at the microphone, their eerie voices filling the mansion with a spectral symphony. Songs from long-forgotten eras echoed through the halls, each performance accompanied by flickering lights and bursts of ectoplasmic mist. Arthur leaned against the wall, arms crossed. This is officially the weirdest ghost hunt we've ever done. Jeff, meanwhile, had grabbed a microphone of his own. "Time for a duet," he declared, launching into a kazoo-backed rendition of "Don't Stop Believin'." The lead ghost, the gaunt figure from earlier, reluctantly joined in, its haunting wail somehow blending perfectly with Jeff's off-key kazoo playing. Arthur buried his face in his hands. "I can't believe this is working." But as the ghosts grew louder and more animated, the walls of the mansion began to shake. The chandelier in the foyer rattled ominously, and a deep, guttural growl echoed from the shadows. Jeff paused mid-kazoo solo, tilting his head. "That doesn't sound like a karaoke enthusiast." Arthur's eyes widened as a dark figure began to materialize in the doorway. It was taller than the other ghosts, its form twisting and writhing like smoke. Its glowing red eyes locked onto the karaoke machine, and its voice rumbled like thunder. "Enough!" The ghosts scattered, their translucent forms flickering out of existence as the malevolent spirit stormed into the room. Arthur grabbed Jeff's arm. "What did you do?" Jeff shrugged. "I guess the headliners arrived." The dark figure loomed over them, its growl reverberating through the parlor. Arthur frantically reached for his ghost traps while Jeff adjusted his kazoo, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. "Time for an encore," Jeff said, blowing a loud, defiant note. The spirit roared, and the room plunged into chaos. The malevolent spirit's roar shook the parlor, sending waves of cold air spiraling through the room. Arthur stumbled back, clutching his ghost trap like a lifeline, while Jeff simply stood his ground, twirling his kazoo between his fingers like a duelist preparing for battle. The dark figure solidified, towering over them. Its shadowy form swirled like smoke, and its glowing red eyes burned with rage. The remaining ghosts cowered in the corners, their flickering forms trembling as the figure's voice boomed. "This house is mine. Leave, or face my wrath." Jeff tilted his head, unimpressed. "Wrath, huh? That's a bit dramatic, don't you think?" Arthur hissed. "Jeff, stop antagonizing it. This one actually looks dangerous." Jeff grinned, raising his kazoo. "Don't worry, Arthur. I've got this." Before Arthur could stop him, Jeff blew a loud, defiant note on his kazoo. The sound was shrill and off-key, echoing through the room like a bad joke. The spirit froze for a moment, as if trying to process the sheer audacity of what had just happened. Then it roared again, lashing out with a tendril of shadow that sent a chair flying across the room. Arthur ducked behind a toppled table, glaring at Jeff. "You've officially made it worse." Jeff stood his ground, completely unfazed. "Spirits respond to confidence, Arthur. It's all about showing them who's boss." The spirit lunged again, its smoky tendrils smashing into the karaoke machine and knocking it sideways. The ghosts that had been cowering let out collective gasps of horror, their flickering forms darting forward to try and shield their beloved device. Arthur peeked out from behind the table. "Great. Now it's mad at us and the ghosts. What's your brilliant plan now, Kazoo King?" Jeff tapped his chin thoughtfully. "We fight fire with fire." Arthur groaned. "Please tell me you don't mean—" Jeff cut him off by grabbing a microphone from the karaoke machine. "Malevolent spirit," he declared, pointing dramatically at the figure. "I challenge you to a duel of music." The spirit paused, its smoky form rippling with confusion. Arthur, still huddled behind the table, stared at Jeff in disbelief. "You're kidding me. This is your plan." Jeff nodded solemnly. "Music is the universal language, Arthur. Even the undead can't resist a good duet." The spirit let out a low growl, then reached for the other microphone. Its shadowy form loomed over the karaoke machine as it let out a deep, bone-chilling note that rattled the windows. Jeff grinned. Game on. What followed was nothing short of surreal. The spirit began with a haunting rendition of an old opera tune, its voice echoing with an ethereal quality that made the hair on Arthur's neck stand on end. Jeff responded with a kazoo-backed version of Bohemian Rhapsody. His kazoo solos were painfully off-key, but he belted out the lyrics with enough enthusiasm to make up for it. The ghosts cheered from the sidelines, clapping their incorporeal hands and swaying to the music. Arthur, meanwhile, buried his face in his hands. I can't believe this is working. As the musical duel continued, Arthur noticed something strange. Each time the spirit sang, the smoky tendrils surrounding it grew weaker, flickering like a dying flame. He crawled toward the karaoke machine, inspecting it closely. Jeff, keep it distracted. Jeff struck a dramatic pose, blowing another kazoo solo. With pleasure. Arthur quickly realized the machine's power amplifier was surging. It was absorbing the spirit's energy. If he could boost the output just a bit more. Grabbing a nearby screwdriver, Arthur adjusted the wiring, adding an ectoplasmic battery Jeff had tossed aside earlier. The machine whirred louder, its lights glowing brighter. Jeff! Arthur shouted. Finish it off. Jeff nodded, his grin widening. It's time for the encore of a lifetime. He grabbed the microphone, raised his kazoo, and launched into an enthusiastic rendition of the Ghostbusters theme song. The kazoo buzzed wildly as Jeff sang off-key, stomping his feet to the beat. The spirit let out a final roar, its smoky form unraveling as the karaoke machine absorbed the last of its energy. With one last dramatic flicker, the spirit vanished into thin air. The ghosts erupted into cheers, their forms glowing brightly as they floated around the room. Arthur slumped against the wall, covered in ectoplasm and utterly exhausted. I can't believe that worked. Jeff walked over, patting him on the shoulder. Never doubt the power of kazoo diplomacy, Arthur. As the ghosts celebrated by taking turns at the now functional karaoke machine, Arthur cleaned up the mess, muttering about never taking another haunted job. Jeff leaned back in one of the parlor's dusty armchairs, munching on a bag of chips. I'd say this was a job well done. Arthur shot him a look. You nearly got us killed. But did you die? Jeff countered, grinning. Arthur groaned, rubbing his temples. Next time, I'm going alone. Jeff blew a playful note on his kazoo. You'd miss me too much. As they left the mansion, the ghosts waved goodbye, their spectral voices harmonizing to the tune of Don't Stop Believin'. Arthur climbed into the car, slamming the door shut. I don't want to hear that kazoo for at least a week. Jeff smirked, pulling it out of his pocket. No promises. And as they drove off, Jeff hummed a kazoo-backed version of the Ghostbusters theme, his laughter echoing into the night.